Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fahim Niaz. I'm the product manager for Animate Studio. Today's webinar is about a beginner's guide to making an animated series with Animate Studio. And it's going to be presented by Chad Troftgruben. Many of you are aware of Chad's work. He is the owner of Incredible Tutorials, and as well as he's developed and created all of the Animate Studio video tutorials that you're seeing on our website, and has done so for version 9 and 10. As well, I wanted you guys to know about the webinar in a sense that we will be taking questions, but we'll be doing so at the very end. So if you do have questions, I would recommend typing them down in the Q&A area and then making sure that we get them, and then we'll have a series of questions, and then we could definitely ask those questions at the very end. As well, this webinar will be recorded and hopefully should be available on our website within 24 hours. And with that, let's begin the presentation. Let's pass the mic over to Chad. Thank you very much.
Hi guys. Hope everyone is doing well today. So this course, or this webinar I should say, is going to be a little bit different than my past webinars because we're going to be touching on the basics of creating an animated series. And a lot of it has to do with theory, a lot of it has to do with opinion, some fact in there of course, but we'll be diving into Animate Studio in a little bit. But first I want to touch on some basics that you may want to practice before you start going into, let's say, an animated project, and just some real basic stuff here to get started. So basically, in this webinar, I'm going to talk to you about ideas, where they come from, and how you should execute them. We'll then touch on writing an outline, as well as creating a screenplay and storyboard. We'll talk about animating, which of course we'll be using Animate Studio for this webinar, because this is an Animate Studio webinar. We will edit with Premiere, and then we'll show you how to publish. So it's going to be a very, very basic crash course, and to be honest, there's so much material here. When it comes to working on an animated project, it's more of something that takes days, weeks, months. So to kind of condense it into an hour is going to be a bit of an interesting challenge, I would say, for me, just to kind of teach it. But I believe we'll be able to do some good here, and I think we'll be able to get you on the right track. So with that said, let's go to the next slide. So before you start any project, I think you need to figure out why you want to do it. So why do you want to animate? And it might seem like a simple question. Why would you want to ask yourself that? But I think it's good to know your motivation before you get started. You know, is it for business? Is it for a hobby? How serious do you want to go with it? How much time do you want to commit to it? Because there's many different types of projects you can do. You can do really, really long projects, you know, a 2-hour animated feature if you wanted to, or you could do 1-minute shorts on YouTube. So you have to determine first what you want to do and what you're capable of doing in terms of time and scheduling and basically what you have at your disposal. You also have to tell yourself, do you like to tell stories? I think that's a big thing. When I was growing up, that's something I love to do. I love to tell stories. I love to make people laugh. And I believe animation is now kind of an extension to that. It allows me to visually show these stories that I like to tell. So if you like to tell stories, of course, that is a plus. And of course, do you like to make people laugh? That's my next point, as you can see. You don't have to make a cartoon that's humorous. For me, that's something I do. But you can do anything you want, just as long as you have an interest in it. And there's also animation for business and education. I do that from time to time. I'll get hired out by other companies to do certain projects that pertain to a business or education setting. And in some ways, the tutorials I do are education-based, and I show how to do animation. So again, you don't have to do it just for, let's say, entertainment. You can do this for anything. And it can be very lucrative if you're able to tap into that. And it's also a challenge. And you have to be looking for a challenge if you want to attempt this, because it might seem pretty simple. You know, you're just going to create a cartoon. You look online, you see a cartoon that's a minute long, and you might think to yourself, well, that's easy. I can do a minute-long cartoon. But there's actually a lot of stuff that can go into a minute-long cartoon. And it really depends on what you're doing with it. But from experience, I can tell you that a minute-long cartoon can take weeks, even if you have that much detail put into it. And whatever the case, be sure you have a strong reason before moving forward. And the reason why I say this, and the reason why I outline all of this, is if you don't have a reason for wanting to create a cartoon, chances are you're not going to stick with it very long, because it is a very involved process. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, and you have to learn a lot in order to perfect it. So you have to have a really strong reason to stick with it. If not, like anything, you might lose interest. And it's just something you have to keep at until you get it right and until you are comfortable with it. So, with that said, let's move on now to discovering ideas. So, when it comes to ideas, what do? You want to make a cartoon, you have ideas, but how do you grab those ideas and make it a tangible product? Well, first, it's kind of cliche, but it's true. You should write what you know or what you want to know, because I believe that allows you to create the most relatable projects. And if a project is relatable, it's going to be more interesting to your audience. You should also research. So let's say you want to create something based in World War II as an example. Well, chances are, just as generations pass, you probably don't have a lot of experience firsthand with World War II. So you'd probably have to do research on that to make it authentic, to make it feel like it's believable, that universe. Maybe even interviews if you could find someone who was involved with that time period. Just things like that. And those are things I do all the time when it comes to my own series. Right now I'm working on a video game type series, so I'm always doing research on different video games that are coming out just to stay relevant with what's releasing that week. And observe your surroundings. You'll be very surprised just what you'll find just in your everyday life that you can turn into comedic, timed events in your animations, or just things that are interesting in general. And keep a notebook handy, or a tablet, or a cell phone. Notebook is just kind of like the old standard, but if you have a writing utensil, it's also very helpful. You never know in your life. If you find something that's interesting, you're going to want to take some notes on that so you have it later on when you start working on your animations. And keep an open mind. This is something I sort of have a hard time with myself. When you're working on an idea, you kind of get entrenched into that idea. You want that idea to be it. It's just the idea that you wanted originally, and you want that idea to come to life. But as you start to work on things, you might realize this idea just doesn't fit anymore, or you have to modify it. And that's where you're keeping an open mind comes in handy. Because if you stay with that one mindset, it can actually damage the animation in the long run if things are not working with that idea. And don't be afraid to bounce your ideas off of others. I do this all the time. I have a partner I work with in my own animations, and we're constantly talking. We're constantly pitching ideas back and forth. And I believe that really helps grow a project if you have the ability to talk to someone about it. And they don't have to necessarily be in animation either. Your wife, a friend, husband, whatever. Talk to them about it. See if they find it appealing. Even if they're not in animation, if they find it appealing, that might be a good indicator that you're onto something good. And you have to also keep in mind, too, if you're going through this with a business venture, that you might have a script that's provided for you. And if that's the case, it's your idea then to interpret that script so that your client is happy. So again, there's a lot of different things here when it comes to discovering ideas. And you might have your own ideas when it comes to those business scripts. But just keep in mind that if they wrote the script, you'll want to make sure that your ideas are what they want before moving forward. So, up next, let's talk about outlining our ideas. So, you're working on something, you have ideas in your head, and you want to apply them to your animation. So, where do you go from there? Well, as I indicated before, a pencil and paper is a great standard, a notebook. But in my case, what I like to use is a tablet or a phone. I keep that handy. And so if an idea comes up, I just open up an application, I jot it down, and it's a cloud-based application that I use, so it goes right to my computer, it goes to my phone, my tablet. Basically, everywhere I work, I'll then have those notes, which is very, very helpful. And that's my next point here in the PowerPoint. Digital recording and outline can be very helpful. So if you don't have that means, that's okay. You have your pencil and paper. That's worked for years for many, many great creative people. So just as long as you have something to record your ideas, it's good. And some software you might want to consider when it comes to note-taking is Evernote and Google Docs. Evernote is one that I use primarily. I just really like the way it works. I'm a huge Google fan when it comes to different things like Gmail and all that, but there's something about Evernote I just really like. It's just really nice to work with. And so it's free, and this is one of those pieces of software that will sync to everything. I have it installed on both of my computers, my tablet, my phone. When you write notes down, it syncs to all those devices, so you never, ever lose it. And don't delete any ideas. And this is key, actually. Let's say you have an idea, you write it down, and then later on you're like, that idea is really stupid. you look at it and you're like, what was I thinking? Don't delete it, because you never know when that stupid idea might actually come in handy later on. You'll be very surprised. Or you'll realize later on that that idea can evolve into something tangible. Or let's say you bounce it off someone else, as I suggested that you do before. They might be like, well, that might not work, but what about this? And the next thing you know, you're on the path to something great. So don't delete ideas. Set them aside if they're not working right now, but don't remove them. Keep them handy, because you never know. So after you outline, my next piece of advice to you is to write a screenplay. Now, if you're doing just a very, very simple, basic project, if it's not going to be, let's say, shared with others in terms of the creative team, you don't have to go through and create a really elaborate screenplay. You can see I have an example here on the right. It's an image, and I'll show you more here in a second in Adobe Story. This is what screenplay format is. And again, this is something that you'll want to do if you want to be seen as professional. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but many in the industry won't take an idea seriously unless if it's written down in screenplay format. And so if you're looking to, let's say, hire people to help you, if you're looking to pitch your idea to a company, you'll want to have it in screenplay format because, again, that's just the standard and that's the way the industry works. And so it's very common for writing scripts, and as I said, it's true when it comes to selling your screenplays. And the good thing about this is you look at this and you're like, well, how the heck am I supposed to write this down? There's all these different capitalizations, you know, everything. Some things are center aligned with the dialogue, other things are not. How am I supposed to keep track of all this? Well, luckily, there is actually software out there that will automatically format you into screenplay format. So you really don't have to think about it. It's more a matter of you concentrating on your writing style while the software takes care of all the technical stuff that you probably don't want to deal with. At least I know I don't want to deal with it. When I'm writing, I just want to get my ideas down. I don't want to have to worry about, you know, if my character is capitalized and center aligned and all that. And you don't have to pay for screenwriting software either. Celtics is a good example of a free and community-based piece of screenwriting software. Additionally, Adobe offers a software called Adobe Story, and there is a free version in addition to the paid version that comes with their cloud service. So you don't have to spend an arm and a leg to get the software. Now, there is Final Draft, which is more professional, and a lot of people in the industry, the film industry, do use Final Draft, and that one is pricier. So it's good, but if you're looking for something free, you can definitely find it out there. So with all that said, I'm going to open up Adobe Story, and we can take a quick look as to how this works. So I have a very simple screenplay pulled up right here with Adobe Story. Oops, let me just go like that. And basically, as you can see, everything is pretty much written out in screenplay format. You have your scene headings. These are what your scene headings are right here, what I have highlighted. And then you have actions. And then you have characters. And you have dialogue. So let me just scroll down here. It's really a simple matter when it comes to writing in the software. Let me just create a new line. My cursor is right below this piece of dialogue right here. Now, with Adobe Story, and basically any screenwriting software, it's this easy. You can come right up here, and you'll see we have a drop-down menu here that allows us to choose the next heading. So in this case, let's say I wanted to create a new scene after this dialogue. Well, instead of thinking about it, just click on Scene Heading, and then you can start writing out your next scene heading, just like this. And then from there, you can hit enter. You could enter in your next thing, whether it's an action, dialogue, and so forth. Now, an action is basically just screen direction, like Mario walks into the house. And so when you're then animating out, you can read that and be like, okay, so I need to show this character walk into the house. And then from there, you can be very detailed with your script if you want. You could actually put stage directions in there if you want, like close-up of Mario walking into the house. Or you can leave it more vague like I have here, and you can then interpret that as you go. Or if you're writing this for someone else, you might want to leave it vague so that they have the ability to use their directional powers, I guess, and basically do what they want to do with this scene. But as you can hopefully see, when it comes to working in screenplay format, things are a lot easier if you have a piece of software that allows you to work with it. It would drive me nuts if I had to go through and try to figure out every single time, okay, I need to capitalize this, I need to do this, I need to do that. Just let the software do it for you. And again, if you want free software, Celtics and Adobe Story, there's a free version of that, will allow you to write in screenplay format. So I'm going to pop back here now to my PowerPoint, and we can resume. So let's go to the next slide here. The next step after you write a screenplay is going to be storyboarding. Now, when it comes to really, really simple cartoons, let's say you have one scene, there's a guy sitting on a couch and he's talking to another guy, you don't have any camera movements. It might not be so important to do a storyboard, but in many cases I would recommend you do it because it allows you to visualize how you're going to apply your assets on screen when you animate in Animate Studio. So again, they don't have to be pretty either though. As you can see, I have an example here on the right. This is actually a South Park storyboard. I'm sure most of you know what South Park is. And what's funny about the storyboards, whenever I look at South Park storyboards, is they actually look better than the cartoons themselves. The artists seem to just put more detail into the storyboards, which is actually kind of funny. But typically, when you work on a storyboard, you're not so much concentrating on the detail of the characters and all that. You're concentrating more on the framing of the shots, the direction of the shots, and all that stuff. So when it comes time to animate, you can just look at those storyboards and be like, okay, this next shot, I need a close-up of my character. In this shot, I need to have my character walk in from the right side of the screen. It really helps you establish things quickly. That way, when you're animating, you don't have to sit there and try to figure out what you're going to do next. So you can do this electronically or on paper. Now, there's a debate as to which one is better or easier. I know there's many people out there who love to do storyboarding on paper. And in many cases, you'll see people who will storyboard on note cards, and they'll have so many images, they'll actually put it on one wall. That way they can look at the whole storyboard at once. They can get a glimpse of the whole project, the whole scope of the project. But there's others, like me, who prefer to do it digitally. And there's many different pieces of storyboarding software out there. One I would recommend is Manga Studio 5, because that will allow you to really easily go in and do storyboarding. And I think you'll find it's pretty familiar to use as well, especially if you're used to Animate Studio, because it is a Smith Micro product. And I believe you'll find that it can greatly help your productivity as you go from storyboard to animation. So let's go to our next slide. So you got all of this stuff done. You've outlined, you've written a screenplay, you have your storyboard, and now it's time to animate. So where do you go from there? Well, the animation process can be incredibly involving, and it really depends on your ideas and concepts. And one question I get a lot on my channel, through personal messages, through emails, is how long does it take to animate? What can you expect duration-wise from your project? To be honest, and I hate to tell people this because it sounds like I'm copping out, but there really is no answer to that because it really depends on how involved your project is. I've worked on projects that go as long as 2 months. I just worked on a project last week that took me 2 days. And again, it depends on your assets, how you've lined them up, it depends on your notes, it depends on how organized you are, and finally it depends on the scope of the project. If you have a cartoon that takes place in one scene, let's say you have a character sitting on a couch talking to another character, as I used before as an example, that's probably not going to take you as long. The main thing will be designing that set, the characters, and then rigging them. After that, you just do the dialogue and you're done. Now if you have a cartoon that has multiple locations, different things going on, let's say you have an army of people charging at the screen, that's going to take a lot of time. Even with Animate Studio, which is great for streamlining the animation process, you're still going to find it's going to be a big time sink. So just keep that in mind as you work. The duration is very hard to judge. But again, if you have the determination and the patience, it will get done. And the more time you spend on something, the better the results. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword, though, because when you work on something, you're going to get better results, which is, of course, a given for anything in life. But you don't want to obsess over the little things. Let's say you're working on a character, and you spend like 3 weeks doing just little details on the clothes. Well, that's great, but you have to keep in mind, what are you trying to achieve here? Let's say you're doing a 1-minute short on YouTube. It's supposed to just be a quick laugh for someone who watches. There's a very good chance they're not going to pay attention to all those little details on the character. So you have to kind of prioritize. Now let's say you're doing a really, really grand cartoon that's going to be very visually pleasing. Then yes, you'd want to probably concentrate on those little details. So again, it's a give and take, and it really comes down to you, and you have to feel out your priority for the cartoon, who your audience is, and what you want to achieve with the cartoon. So now we move to the bulk of it. We're going to talk about animating in Animate Studio, and then I'll open up Animate Studio and we can take a look at some things. So as many of you probably know by now, Animate Studio is an animation software created by Smith Micro, and that's why we're in this webinar right now. And it really makes cutout animation easy. Bone animation is another term for it. And between all the different software I have used, I believe this really does stand true, because there's no other software out there quite like it that allows you to go in, rig up a character, and use it as a puppet as easily as Animate Studio allows you to do. And so if you're looking for that bone animation look, I believe Animate Studio is the best bet for your project. And it does come in 2 versions, Debut and Pro. And Debut is great for beginners, and it's great for people who are maybe unsure if Animate Studio is right for them. But if you're serious, let's say you're a serious hobbyist, or you want to do this as a career, which Animate Studio is a very viable piece of animation software, and you can make a career out of it, I would definitely recommend going Pro after a certain point. And it's easy to learn. It's probably the easiest animation software to learn, at least it was for me. I was actually surprised just how easy it was to pick up on the concepts. But like anything, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Once you get the basics of Animate Studio, you're only getting started, because you have to master your craft. You have to figure out just the pacing that's best for your cartoon. You have to figure out so many different details when it comes to animation. The principles of animation, squash and stretch, hesitation, all of that is just a part of the learning process. But luckily, as I said, Animate Studio makes it very easy to learn, so at least you're not battling the software. You're more so than perfecting your craft. So with all that said, I'm going to open up Animate Studio, and I'm going to talk us through a couple different things with the software. So let me just come out of here, and I'll bring up Animate Studio. So here I have a basic shot. Let me just zoom out. And I'm going to talk over the process I use when it comes to creating an animated series, since that is the topic of discussion here for this webinar. There is so much you can do. There's so much you can learn with Animate Studio. And in the past, I have touched on, in different webinars and tutorials and my new book, Learning Animate Studio, how to draw and how to rig your characters. And those are definitely the first things you should learn when it comes to working with the software. So you can go through all those things and you can learn that very easily. What I'm going to show you here is just a process I use when it comes to building scenes, because one thing I get questions about a lot is, where do you start with Animate Studio? Do you begin with the characters? Do you do the backgrounds? You know, where do you lip sync? Where do you do the movements? You know, how do you do different scenes? How do you go from one shot to another shot somewhere else? You know, do you do that all in one project file? Do you split it up? How do you do it? And that's what I'm going to cover here. So first, I have just a very simple scene opened up. This is from a recent cartoon I did, and you probably recognize the character. It's Luigi, one of the Mario brothers. And what I did with this shot, when I wrote the script, it all takes place basically in one location. I have two different shots that occur throughout here. One where you see the TV, what he's playing basically, and another where you see another character in another house. But for the most part, it mostly takes place here. And what I did first was I drew the background out. That's something I always start with. I'm not sure why. I think I feel more comfortable getting a background down first before I start putting the characters in. It just allows me to get a setting. Now, as you can see, the background is pretty basic. I do have some details going on here. We have stains on the walls, just probably from, I don't know, pipes leaking, and we have different cracks in the walls, and it looks like a really dirty place. But originally, when I came up with this concept, I didn't just dive in and create a really detailed background. I kind of wanted to get an idea of the layout first. So when I originally designed this background, this is actually what it looked like. It was very basic, and just ignore the broken images there. This is from an older project file, so the folder was moved, so those images aren't currently set. But as you can see, I don't have any of the details there anymore. There's no cracks, there's no stains on the walls. It's just very, very basic. So what I actually did here is I took that and I handed it over to a partner, Jimmy Mills. He does a lot of animation work himself, and he's very, very good at design work. And so I've kind of developed a workflow where I go in and I set down everything that I want, the characters, the backgrounds, and then I give it to him, and he has the magic of making things look disgusting. So as you can see, we now have a dingy-looking basement with some added details like a light and so forth. So that's what I do first. I get the background down, I hand it over to Jim. He works his magic while I move on to the characters. So as you can see, there's kind of a constant flow of work going on there. There's never a point where everything is stalled. He's working on something, I'm working on something. I then draw the characters out, and I rig it up as best as I can. I then hand it over to Jim. He goes back in and he does some of the polishing work that he is best at, just kind of creating those little details. I think the Mario character is actually a really good example of this. Let me just kind of get a shot here of him. As you can see, he is quite disgusting. And again, I guess that's a perk of Jim. But our idea here was to make Mario kind of more of a has-been in this cartoon. That's why we did that. But I get a basic idea down, hand it over to him, and he then goes in and basically allows all that to come to life. So once we have that set, we rig the characters, and that allows us then to move them around. Let me come back here to my first frame, and I'm going to click on the Luigi rig, and in fact, I'm going to hide everything else. And I can do that just by holding an Alt and hitting the eyeballs next to the Luigi layer. So as you can see, we rig it all up. I can move things around. We can move his body around. And when it comes to rigs, now in this case, we have Luigi just playing a video game. He doesn't do much else. He's not jumping around. He's not, running around and all that kind of stuff. And that's why a screenplay is really handy as well, because you get an idea of what the character is going to do. In this case, he's limited to the couch. So we don't have to do a really, really advanced rig where all these things can work, seamlessly. You can just rig it to where you need it to work. So in this case, he sits there, and that's all we really need. Now his legs move, as you can see, but it's not really designed, as you can tell right here, it's not really designed to be a running animation or anything like that. He's just sitting there. You never see his legs, so it's all good. Another thing that helps with streamlining the animation process, too, is using smartbones. And this is something, for a while, I didn't really utilize. When it came out, I think with Anime Studio 9, I thought it was cool, but I guess I didn't really grasp the whole, I would say, advantage of using them. But now I can't live without them. And here's why. you can see right here on the side I have these dials. We have a thumb dial. We actually have a couple thumb dials. We have one for the eyelids. We have one for the eyes themselves. We have sad and mad. There's all these different things. Basically, you set this up in advance, so you don't have to do so much work later on. So as an example, just a very basic example, we have the thumb right here that allows us to control the thumb right down here. You can see as I move this dial, the thumb goes up and down on that controller. And that's because, in this case, we have a rig set up so he's playing a video game. And it helps when I'm going through the timeline, I can just page forward, I can just move this dial. I don't have to go through and actually go through the points of animating the thumb. So again, very simple. But then you move on to the eyelids. You can see I can control the eyelids at any time just by using this dial. And again, it's smart bones. Very, very simple smart bones. Just create an action and you go in and you just take two circles and you squish them together. And then you have the dial on the other side where they're further apart. And that's all you have to do. It's set. You don't have to worry about going in and individually animating those layers. It's just really nice and very, very simple. And then you have the eyes. Now if I do this, you might be thinking, well, what the heck is this for? This is not doing me any good. Well, that might be true, unless if we use the transform bone tool. So if I take that and I physically move the bone around, you can see now I can create really nice eye movements. Now again, you could achieve the same thing by going into your layers or your actual vector points and moving things around. But this is just so much simpler for me. I can just go in, I can move the eyes wherever I want them. In conjunction with, of course, your eyelids, you can do some different things with the eyes. And again, this is something that takes probably about 10 minutes to set up. And after that, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's one of the many different benefits of Animate Studio when it comes to animating out your work. And then there is, of course, the sad and mad. This is just something we rigged up really quick. Again, another smart bone. You can just have him frown. You can see that the lines in his forehead move with him as we do that. So again, it's really, really nice. So I guess my point about this is when it comes to rigging your characters, you should really be smart about it. So of course, you have to use smart bones. Take advantage of the smart bones because, again, it really is useful. And this is just what I use them for. Many people use them for, let's say, head turns, body turns, different color changes. There's just basically limitless things you can do with smart bones, and I would definitely take advantage of that when possible. So now, going back to my main point, once you have your characters rigged up and you have all these dials set as an example, going through and animating is a very simple process. So let me just clear the animation out of this document really quick, just so I can have a fresh start here. So I can go through, let's say to frame 24. I could come in here. I could apply some keyframes just by hitting Control and then F on my keyboard to set keyframes down for my bones. So I have a starting keyframe for my bones. I can go to frame, let's say 36. I could then take my eyes, maybe move them over this way. Maybe I could take my eyelids and just kind of go down like this. I can make him maybe a little bit sad. So then when I go back to frame 24, and you page forward, you can see we have animation. Now you apply that then with some other stuff. Let's go back here to frame 36. Lower his head. Come down here, maybe lower his body a little bit. So you kind of have this going on. And as you can see, I did that within, what, a matter of 30 seconds. And that's all because I have these dials set up. So be sure you keep your rigs organized and take advantage of everything that Animate Studio has to offer. And I think you'll find that it will make your workflow a lot easier. So after you have your rigs and you animate out, as I'm doing right now, you'd go through your script, you would reference your script, you would put in your recorded lines if there's dialogue, you would lip sync, you can do all that, and you can lip sync easily with dials, or you can do so with actions, which is what I do right up here. I have actions for my character's face right in here. Just got to find the face. You can see I have different actions, so I can go in here and just, let's say, add a reference. So he has that mouth pose. I could add a reference then for this one, so he closes his mouth like that. and then everything animates out just like that. So once you have it all set and you animate out, you're good to go. Now it comes down to a matter of your scene changes. Let's say, for instance, you have a bunch of different scenes. What I typically like to do, let's say you have a location that takes place 3 times in your script. I'll actually animate everything out on the same file, typically, for those 3 scenes. Because if it's the same shot and your characters are in the same position, I just go through, I kind of make a cut in my head where the first scene ends, and then the next one begins. And I animate all 3 scenes out in one file. I will then take it over to Premiere to cut up and then insert other cuts from other scenes. So that's how you can work with multiple scenes in Anime Studio. So after that, once you render out your files, you bring it into a video editing software. You work with that, you publish it, and you're good to go. So let me just pop back here to my PowerPoint. We can continue on then with the next portion of that. So now, as I said, you have everything rigged up, you animate everything out, you're good to go. It's time to find a video editor. In other words, a piece of software that will allow you to take these videos and then cut them up and reorganize them so that you can create a tangible and basically a cohesive narrative. So this is especially important if you, again, have multiple shots and you want to put this, let's say, on YouTube, or you want to put it on a Blu-ray, or you want to just distribute it in some way. And there's many free programs out there, so you don't have to invest. The good thing about this is the only investment you really have to do is Anime Studio. After that, you can find free software to carry you the rest of the way. As an example, iMovie is a great free video editor for Mac users, while Windows gets Windows Live Movie Maker. So you can go in and you can use those tools to edit your stuff. Now, of course, it's pretty limited. You can't do a whole lot with these free pieces of software, but they will get you by until you figure out what you want to do and if you want to invest in, let's say, a premium video editor. Now, examples of premium editors are Sony Vegas. That's a popular one. Final Cut Pro, which is Mac only, but it's also very popular, especially for television production. And then there's Premiere. Now, Premiere is my personal favorite, primarily because I like to work with the interface, but also I like to jump back and forth between Premiere and After Effects. Between Anime Studio, Premiere, and After Effects, you have an incredibly powerful combination where you can basically create anything you want. You animate in Anime Studio, you bring assets into After Effects and apply some really awesome effects. You can do anything you want in there. And then you take it all into Premiere and you cut it up, add music, add sound effects, or you can do that in Anime Studio as well. Typically, I like to work with audio in a video editor, but you can do that in Anime Studio with the audio. And then you're set and you're good to go. Between those 3 pieces of software, you really have it made. So let's take a look at Premiere really quick, and I'll show you just kind of how I break down my editing when it comes to working in Anime Studio. So I'll pop this up. So basically, that scene you saw, I rendered that whole thing out. And I went in and made some cuts accordingly. Now, another thing I do sometimes, you're going to see here, I have a bunch of assets on my timeline. Why do I have all these assets? Well, sometimes I like to actually go in to Premiere and individually export out different assets. So right here, we have this shot. I actually have Luigi as his own asset. So what I do is I hide everything in Anime Studio. I export Luigi out individually. I then bring him in to After Effects or Premiere. The reason why I do this is I find it easier to work with, because sometimes I like to do depth of field effects outside of Anime Studio, and this is just sometimes a personal preference. Anime Studio's depth of field effects are great, but sometimes you might want something a little bit different, let's say through After Effects. So when I go to a close-up, I'm then allowed to blur out the background myself if I want to, and I can keep him then in focus because he is a separate asset compared to the background. But basically, as you can see, I've gone through here, and I have all sorts of different audio laid down. I kind of go in and I do the audio myself through Premiere, just different things, like I have footsteps right here for when Mario comes down the stairs and everything. And it all just kind of works out. And what I do then, I edit out these scenes individually. So we have the basement. I had another shot here of some game footage, and then I have finally the shot where we have another character in his house. So when I'm done, I create a second sequence where I basically combine and cut these all up. So as you can see, we have different things going on with all that. So it's very, very easy to work with once you get to that point after you're done with Anime Studio. It all works together. So here's some general tips for animation. I've kind of covered this, but I'm just going to go over it again. So first, design your characters, or you can design your backgrounds, whichever. I kind of flip-flop on those. Record your voices if you have dialogue. This is important. You want to record those things early. You never know when an actor might be sick, gone, can't record lines when you need them. That should be the first thing you do after you get your script done, besides designing your characters, of course. You rig your characters for animation, as I showed you with the dials, just rigging your bones and all that. Design your backgrounds so that you're good to go there. Make sure everything is clean and good. You know, send it over to your gym if you have a gym like I do. Have him dirty it up or do what he needs to do, add detail. You can design your props then. So as you can see in this shot, I have a monitor. I have a controller for Luigi, so you can do all that. And then you animate out. You compose your shots so everything looks nice, everything's in frame. You do your character movements. You can then animate out your dialogue with your recorded dialogue. And then basically after that, you cover everything else. You go back and you polish, you make sure everything's tight, everything looks good, there's no weird things going on with the animation. Once you're set, you bring it into edit, and then you might have to repeat 6 through 7 if needed, animating and editing, because sometimes when you go into edit, you might realize, oops, I made a mistake in animating. Go back into Anime Studio, correct it, re-render your videos, bring it back into the software. You have to repeat that process until you get it just right. And then you publish your work, put it on the web, distribute it somewhere else, maybe at a film festival, and then you become famous, or so we all hope. So after that, here's some last-minute tips from me to you. Don't get caught up on the small details. I kind of went over this. You should polish your work, but just don't go overboard. Again, that's the example. If you're working on a 1-minute short, don't spend 4 weeks on the details of someone's clothes or the details of a car. While it will look really nice for that type of project, I don't think people are going to be paying much attention to that. Of course, if it's grander in scope, then yes. Don't worry about making mistakes. Everyone makes them, and the only way you're going to learn is if you make mistakes. Just do your best, get feedback, make it better. You should always try to make your animations better each time. That should be a goal you strive for. That's something I always strive for. And get those voices recorded early. Again, I've run into issues where people go out of town, they get sick, you know, and I do voices myself, but there's a lot of times where I want to rely on others just to have a variety of voices, and just make sure you get them recorded early. If you hit writer's block, try going for a walk or get some exercise. And I can't tell you how much this helps me. I'll go for a run. Next thing I know, I have a great idea in my head. Exercise really helps with that, especially if you are sitting at a desk all day. You get cabin fever. It just happens. So be sure you move around, exercise, not to mention it's good for you to do. Stay organized. It can be tough, especially when you have a lot of stuff going on, but make folders. Make a folder for your Anime Studio files, make a folder for your exported videos, a folder for your voices. Just try to organize it as best as you can, because as you get into the meat of it, it's going to become a process where you realize you don't want to be searching for stuff when you're trying to animate out your project. And seek out resources. That is key as well. Again, this webinar is very basic, and I can't cover everything I want to cover. It would have to probably actually be a class in order to cover everything that you need to know, because we would have to come back day after day to cover all this stuff. So this is a very basic crash course. So be sure you seek out additional resources. And some of those resources, my website, incredibletutorials.com. I have a bunch of free tutorials on Flash, Anime Studio, and Premiere. Those last two specifically you'd want to look at. I have incrediblefiles.com where I offer premium courses. And then there is my new book, Learning Anime Studio. And I would definitely recommend you check that out, because I basically cover how to create a project from beginning to end within that book. It comes with exercise files. It has images, basically everything you would ever need to create a project. So again, if you're looking for resources, they're right there. There's also the official Anime Studio tutorials, which I have also authored, and those contain a wealth of information as well. So with that said, I believe that concludes my portion of this, so we can hand it back then to Fahim, and maybe we can start taking some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chad. We have a few questions in the queue right now. Should the audience wish to ask more questions, please do so. We'll try to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes asking as many questions as possible. So without further ado, first question that's come up is, do you have any software recommendations for creating audio, specifically music and sound effects, something that's available online?
Yes. Two recommendations I can make. If you're looking for something free, I would recommend Audacity. It's actually a community-based software, and they're always updating it with new things. And you can go in there and you can record voices. Doing music might be a little bit tougher, but voices and sound effects for sure, that software would be great for. GarageBand, I believe, is free on Mac computers, and that would allow you to create music. I use Audition, which is part of the Adobe suite, and that would definitely be suited for music in addition to voices and sound effects. Of course, the catch there is it does cost money. You would have to have a subscription to the Adobe Cloud. But those are my three recommendations when it comes to working with audio.
Okay, thank you. The next question is in relation to storyboarding. When you first are trying to push an idea out or you're trying to sell it, do you create a synopsis first or do you create the whole story first?
Well, yeah, I would say probably the best thing to do first is write out the story. And there might be different opinions on that, primarily because let's say you have an idea and you want to work on that. You have a synopsis and you pitch it, and then you go back to the script and you write it and you realize things aren't going to work how you originally envisioned in that synopsis, and you might have to change things because an idea can translate very differently to script once you start writing it. Now, in the case of, let's say you have a project coming up and a business wants you to work with them, and they just want an idea. In that case, yeah, giving them an idea is good. You could just say, you know, things might change, but my recommendation would be to do a screenplay first if possible. If it's a deadline thing, then yeah, you could throw a synopsis at them, you know, and tell them maybe things might change. But I would recommend a screenplay first.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what are some of the series that you've worked on?
Well, the series I've worked on are more kind of internet-based. I haven't done anything big, which I wish I would have, but I haven't quite yet. I do just different cartoon series on YouTube. I've done like, there's one called Bubba, Mr. Bennick's Class. I'm doing a series right now where I do these video game parodies. That's kind of what you were seeing with that Mario rig and all that. And basically I do these for fun, but additionally I'm a YouTube partner, so I do get ad dollars. And my goal is just to get viewers to my stuff, to view it, and to basically somehow make a living off of it. And I couple that with the tutorials I teach. And I've been doing it for years. I've been animating since 2002 when I was a freshman in high school. Started with Flash, and so I've just been working on it ever since. And it's just something I love to do and plan to continue to do for the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you. The next question is it possible to make a living from creating series, and if so, how?
Well, I think what I just said probably touches on that. You can make a living, definitely. There's many talented, I'm going to go with YouTube as an example for this, just because that's kind of the mindset I'm in, that's what I do. But there's many talented people out there who have channels that get millions and millions of views. And all these views amount to ad dollars. And there's some people out there who definitely make a living off of YouTube. They just are able to find their audience, that's very important, create compelling content, and at a consistent pace. And once you get that audience, you get the subscribers, you get people viewing, engaged, commenting, giving you ideas, next thing you know, you have a following. And after that, yes, you could definitely make a living. Beyond that, it comes down to perhaps freelancing. You could go to different businesses who maybe want commercial work done, animated commercial work. You could also work for other industries like studios, animation studios. They're out there, they exist. And there's just many different avenues you can take. I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. You can't just be like, I'm going to make money today off an animation and that's it. It requires a lot of hard work and dedication, especially in the YouTube space. It requires promotion. You have to be on top of things. You have to be consistent with your material. But yes, it's definitely possible.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question is about your book on Anime Studio. Tell us a little bit more about that, and specifically who is it ideal for, and what will they basically learn in using your book?
Yes, the book is ideal for beginners because I basically cover everything from the very basics. We learn all about the tools. We learn about all the layers, the camera tools, everything. Everything that you would ever need to basically get up and running with Anime Studio. And then from there, we go into more advanced things, like rigging a character, drawing a character, designing backgrounds, animating a character out. And the other topic that this would be ideal for is if you are new to Anime Studio 10, because I designed the book specifically for many of the new enhancements in version 10, such as the anchor bones and all that stuff. So I would definitely recommend my book. Well, of course, I'm going to recommend my book regardless, but I would recommend it for sure if you are a beginner. And if you're just curious about Anime Studio, or let's say you've had a hard time learning it in the past, I've read many people have learned from my book even after in the past trying to maybe watch a tutorial. If you're better at learning through reading, definitely. And again, there's example files that come with the book which can really help you, so you can reference those and you can follow along.
Are those example files available within the book, or is it available on a website?
I believe it's available through the book. I think what happens is when you buy the book, you get a link through the purchase that allows you to go to PAC's website and then download the files.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just out of my own curiosity, how long did it take you to write the book, and if you had any interesting experiences while doing so?
Yes. Well, I actually started the book as a self-published book. I was going to release it on Amazon or through just different services that allow you to self-publish. And I started that, I believe it was December of 2012. And I worked on it for over a year because, funny enough, as I was working on the book, the publisher approached me and they're like, hey, we see you do Anime Studio tutorials. We're wondering if you could do a book for us. And funny enough, I was actually working on a book. So I decided to partner up with them and do a published book. And it was quite a process. I actually went through 3 different versions of Anime Studio when writing it. So every time a new version came out, I had to go back and re-edit for the new enhancements. It was definitely a process, and I did have fun with it though. It was a lot of fun because I never wrote a book before, and it was really rewarding after the fact to see all the positive comments I got from it. So I was a little bit nervous since it was my first book, but I think it's pretty well received right now. So.
It absolutely is, and it's a testament to you to your work ethic there, Chad. That writing a book is quite a difficult task. So congrats to you. I'm sure everyone else in the audience is thinking the same thing. So with that, do you have any last-minute comments or anything as far as advice is concerned before we wrap up the webinar?
It comes down to a matter of just sticking with it, and it can be discouraging, like anything. If you're working on something and you're not seeing the results, it can be discouraging. But you just got to stick with it, and you just got to believe that what you're doing is going to eventually turn into something. And what's great about something like Anime Studio and animation in general is you do get to see that evolution from paper to concept, and then finally to the reaction from your audience. And again, I would just stick with it, learn as much as you can, try to perfect your craft, and just believe in it. And I think eventually you'll find your audience, and you'll be able to do what you love.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chad. With that, Michi, if you could pass the reins of the webinar to me, I will conclude. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Chad, for taking the time to go through and prepare for this webinar. We may have missed a few questions towards the end there, but not to worry. What we'll do is we'll get Chad to answer those on Facebook, so we'll get back to you with regards to those questions. If you'd like more information on Anime Studio, please check out the Anime Studio website, anime.smithmicro.com. We definitely have more webinars coming up, and webinars that have been created in the past that you can check out that are still very relevant. Please check those out at my.smithmicro.com/webinars. And should you have any questions on Anime Studio, the process of animating, we do have an official forum at lostmarble.com. Chad's on there. He hangs out there, answers questions once in a while, and so does a bunch of other people that are your peers, as well as that are superior animators that have been using Anime Studio for many, many years. So that would be a great resource for you should you need any help if you're new to Anime Studio. If you're experienced, and maybe you can help other folks in there as well. We also have an Anime Studio Facebook page that you can like and that you can check out. We have lots of new information available on Anime Studio, the community, and animations that come out on a consistent basis. So you can always see what people are up to and are doing. As well, we have a Twitter page, and you can definitely follow us there. Finally, should you want some good deals on Anime Studio, please make sure to subscribe to our email list. That would be fantastic. You would get the latest and the greatest news and deals on Anime Studio. Should you have a website, you can definitely become an affiliate of ours. We definitely have an affiliate program, and that'll help you make a little bit of extra money while you're spreading the word on Anime Studio. And should you be a teacher or a student, we do have educational pricing, and you can check out the link on the bottom there for information on that. Finally, Chad, thank you very much for all your time. Should the audience want more information on Chad, please check out his website, incredibletutorials.com. He has the amazing book that he's written on Anime Studio. The links are available to you right there. Please check it out. Please support him by purchasing his book and checking that out. I'm sure it'll be an investment that you will not regret. So thank you very much for your time and spending it with us, Chad, and as well as to the audience.